Imagine this. Britain, the globe-straddling titan with the world's most powerful navy, finds itself trapped in a town barely bigger than a modern suburb. Boston, Massachusetts, population, cranky. The British Army, led by General Thomas Gage, had been stationed there to keep the colonies in line. But on April 19, 1775, things went spectacularly sideways. British troops marched out to seize colonial weapons in Concord. But thanks to Paul Revere and his midnight gallop, no GPS, just guts, the countryside lit up like a bonfire. At Lexington, a few dozen militiamen stood their ground. No one knows who fired first, but it was enough to start a war. The British pushed on to Concord, only to find thousands of rebels waiting. They retreated in chaos, sniped at from behind trees, fences, and probably a few angry cows. By the time they stumbled back into Boston, they were surrounded. A 20-mile ring of rebel fortifications boxed them in. The greatest empire on earth was now stuck in a colonial cul-de-sac. On June 17, 1775, the British tried to break the siege. They launched an assault across the Charles River toward Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill. Naming was not their strong suit. The colonists, under William Prescott, famously said, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." The result? A bloodbath. The British technically won the hill, but lost over 1,000 men, nearly half their force. It was a victory that felt like a funeral. Now, let's talk about food. The British couldn't forage in the countryside without getting ambushed, so they relied on supply ships from England and Ireland, and oh boy, did that go badly. Of 550 Lincolnshire sheep sent to Boston, only 40 arrived alive. The rest, dead, diseased, or possibly eaten by sailors. Of 290 hogs, just 74 survived. 5,200 barrels of flour turned rancid mid-voyage. Imagine opening one of those in a cramped ship hold. Instant regret. Of 40 transports sent that winter, only 8 made it. The rest were blown to the Caribbean, back to Britain, or intercepted by rebel pirates who probably laughed all the way to the tavern. The British Army was starving. They lived on salt meat, which was basically shoe leather with seasoning. Disease ran rampant: smallpox, dysentery, scurvy, and other delightful 18th century plagues. William Howe, the British commander, was a man of contradictions. Born into aristocracy, he was the brother of Admiral Richard Howe and had a distinguished military career. He fought in the 7 Years' War and was known for bravery and tactical skill. But in Boston, he was stuck. He calculated that to move his army overland would require 3,662 horses and 540 wagons. He had fewer than 700 horses and 40 wagons. That's like planning a road trip with a broken tricycle. His army was hungry, diseased, and demoralized. Howe considered abandoning Boston as early as December 1775, but held on, hoping for reinforcements. Spoiler, they didn't come. Back in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress was arguing like a dysfunctional family at Thanksgiving. Who should lead the rebellion? Enter George Washington, the tall, stoic Virginian with a military resume and a powdered wig that could intimidate a bear. Washington was born in 1732, the son of a tobacco planter. He inherited Mount Vernon through marriage to Martha Custis, a wealthy widow. He had fought in the French and Indian War, where he learned 2 things. British officers were arrogant. War was messy. He had failed in business, his land speculation ventures flopped, but he was respected for his discipline, leadership, and ability to look majestic on horseback. On June 15, 1775, Congress appointed him commander-in-chief. Why? Because he was from Virginia, and they needed to show this wasn't just a New England tantrum, it was a united colonial front. Washington rode into Cambridge in July 1775 on a white horse, looking like he'd just stepped out of a painting. What he found was chaos. Thousands of militiamen camped around Boston. No uniforms, no discipline. Some were using pitchforks as weapons. Washington's army was a mess. Supplies were scarce. Gunpowder was so low he considered bluffing the British with fake cannon drills. Troops left when their enlistments expired. Disease spread. Morale was shaky. Yet Washington held it together. He kept the army intact, trained them, and maintained the illusion of strength. He wrote, "I am wearied to death all day with a variety of perplexing circumstances." Translation, "I'm holding this army together with duct tape and prayer." Henry Knox was not your typical war hero. Born in Boston in 1750, he was a self-educated son of a shipbuilder who had to drop out of school at age 9 to support his family. He devoured books on military science and artillery like they were pastries, eventually opening a bookstore called London Bookstore on Cornhill Street. When the Revolution broke out, Knox didn't just read about war, he joined it. Washington met him in Cambridge in 1775 and was immediately impressed. Knox suggested a wild idea: retrieve the cannons captured at Fort Ticonderoga, 300 miles away in upstate New York, and drag them to Boston to break the siege. Washington, desperate for artillery and probably thinking, well, we've got pitchforks and prayers, why not try cannons, gave the green light. On November 17, 1775, Knox set off with his brother William and a small crew. Their mission? Move 60 tons of artillery, 59 cannons, mortars, and howitzers, across frozen rivers, snow-choked mountains, and roads that were more suggestion than reality. They used ox-drawn sledges, flat-bottomed boats, horse carts, and a whole lot of sheer willpower. They crossed the Hudson River twice, navigated the Berkshire Mountains, and battled blizzards so fierce they made grown men cry. One cannon fell through the ice and had to be fished out like a frozen whale. Knox wrote to Washington, "The business, though difficult, is not impracticable." Translation: we're freezing, but we're not quitting. After 70 days, Knox arrived in Cambridge in late January 1776, with all the artillery intact. Washington probably hugged him, or at least nodded approvingly, which for Washington was basically a standing ovation. Washington now had the firepower, but he needed a plan. Boston was still occupied by General William Howe and 9,000 British troops. The city sat on a peninsula, vulnerable from the south at Dorchester Heights, a hill overlooking Boston Harbor. On the night of March 4th, 1776, Washington launched a masterclass in military deception. He ordered thousands of troops to dig fortifications under cover of darkness. Hay bales were stacked to muffle the sound of digging. Fake campfires were lit to distract the British. Oxen and sledges hauled Knox's cannons up the icy slopes. By dawn, the British woke up to find massive fortifications and dozens of cannons aimed directly at their ships and headquarters. General Howe blinked, rubbed his eyes, and famously said, "Those fellows have done more work in one night than my whole army would have done in a month." Translation: we're toast. Washington didn't fire a single shot. He just waited. Howe knew that attacking Dorchester Heights would be suicidal. He'd already lost 1,000 men at Bunker Hill. So he made the only rational choice: evacuate. Over the next 2 weeks, the British packed 9,000 troops, 1,200 dependents, wives, children, servants, 1,000 loyalists, colonists who still loved the king. They crammed onto 78 ships, along with their cannons, wagons, and whatever dignity they had left. On March 17, 1776, they sailed to Halifax, Nova Scotia, leaving behind a city they had occupied for nearly a decade. With that, the British Empire had no port between Canada and Florida. The Atlantic coast was now rebel territory. Washington rode into Boston like a conquering hero. He had won a strategic masterpiece without fighting a single battle. The city was liberated. The siege was over. The rebels had proven they could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast the greatest military force on earth. But Washington knew the war was just beginning. He wrote, "The enemy is gone, but the cause remains." Henry Knox became Washington's chief of artillery and later the first Secretary of War. His cannon-hauling feat became legendary, known as the Noble Train of Artillery. General Howe, humiliated, would later lead British forces in New York and Philadelphia. His indecision and caution became infamous. Critics said he was too slow, too soft, and too fond of tea. George Washington emerged as the undisputed leader of the Revolution. His calm under pressure, strategic brilliance, and ability to inspire ragtag troops made him the beating heart of the rebellion. Boston became a symbol of resistance. The evacuation was celebrated as Evacuation Day, and the city never again fell under British control. The Siege of Boston proved that the colonies could stand up to the British Empire. It united the colonies, gave Washington his first taste of command, and set the stage for the Declaration of Independence. If you loved this deep dive into powdered wigs, cannon smoke, and colonial courage, subscribe to our channel for more epic tales from history. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a musket blast of storytelling. Ready for the next chapter? Let's march on to the Declaration of Independence.